everyone to the International Media Management Academic Association podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Craig LaMay from Northwestern and Mark Shannon from BeIN to discuss sports broadcasting and media rights. Craig LaMay is a journalist, professor at Medill, and former acting dean at Northwestern Qatar. He's a longtime practitioner. He published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and many others. He authored Football in the Middle East, published by Oxford, and is a member of the International Society of Sports Sciences in the Arab world. I am grateful he accepted my invitation to host this episode, and he will introduce our guest, Mark Shannon. Craig, over to you.
Thank you, Wilhelm. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a real delight to be able to interview Mark Shannon and to talk about BeIN. A few words about Mark before we start. He is a highly regarded professional with almost 2 decades of experience in the sports industry and held senior roles at world-renowned organizations that include BBC Studios and the British Football Association, sports governing body there. He was head of broadcast for 7 years. He's based in the UK. I think he's joining us in the UK today, where he oversees the central acquisition and content strategy function for the BeIN Media Group globally, across the Middle East and North Africa region, United States, Canada, Australia, France, Turkey, Spain, and Southeast Asia. He built both the acquisition and account management teams from the ground up, and he's acquired and renewed sports rights to the biggest names in international competition, including the UEFA Champions League, the English Premier League, the NBA, and Wimbledon. He is a sports enthusiast at heart, having studied physical education and sports science at UK's preeminent sports university, Loughborough, as well as becoming founder and trustee of the sports charity Football Action, which has educational and sports projects in Ethiopia, Kenya, Honduras, and Guatemala. And I want to add, since I think it seems relevant to our conversation, he's an ultra marathon, a sport unlike any other. And that tells you that he has determination and endurance in his skill set. So with that, Mark, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. I was thinking I was keeping the ultramarathon thing under the carpet, but you obviously did your research on that as well.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what brought you to BeIN after in your sports media career?
Yeah, I was. So you touched on a few of the places I worked before, and I read them was at the English FA, which was, for me, I'm a big football nut, and that was as close as I was ever going to get to being a professional footballer. So I managed to fly around the world with the England team and, get as close to the action as I could, and it was great in that role. But then through the contacts there, I met a guy called Dan Malcolm, who's now our chief of staff at BeIN, and he'd been asked to set up this role in the UK and this office in the UK. And so our UK office was kind of set up so that we can have centralized conversations with all the rights holders. Prior to that, the individual companies probably would have had individual conversations. So it allows us to have a lot of efficiencies and everything else. And so it sounded like a really exciting project. I think I was the 5th person in there. We're now 60 plus people in that team. So it was, it was going in to get really involved in building a team, building the office. But also I think with BeIN, we work with pretty much every rights holder somewhere in the world. And so, and to have those relationships with, as broad a range from, as you mentioned, some of them, the NBA, Wimbledon, EPL, Champions League, to FIBA basketball, to, Tour de France that's on at the moment. There's all those sports, and we work with nearly all of them. So it's a really exciting place to be. And I think as well, moving from, I'm never quite sure whether I was a poacher turned gamekeeper or a gamekeeper turned poacher, but obviously I used to sell rights and now I buy rights. But I think this side of the fence, given I'm sure there's lots of things we're going to come on to, but how the industry's changing, how we're migrating towards OTT and that whole digital shift, it's just a fascinating place to be at the moment. And I think even with some of the big competitors with Netflix and everyone else, I think they're all seeing now the value of live sport, and that is really what drives subscribers, and we're right in the middle of that. So it's a great place to be.
Wonderful. You touched on all the topics I'd like to talk to you about today. Let's start with talking about the acquisition rights business in MENA, and how BeIN has developed its acquisition rights strategy in that region over the last years, particularly before the World Cup. And I would preface that by saying that, as you know, of course, 3 of those years were profoundly affected by BeIN, the Saudi sports piracy operation, which is very disruptive in several existing rights relationships. So where does rights acquisition in MENA stand now? Where are you, and how do you see the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, just for context, we always start with is we're a relatively new media organization. I mean, if you look at, some of the big US ones that you'll be very familiar with, they've been around for a long, long time. I mean, Al Jazeera Sport, as we were, was only founded 20 years ago. So our lifetime is very, very small, and we've developed a lot in that time. And I'd say initially we had a very different acquisition strategy to what we have now. Like any new business, new entrant into a market, we had to be quite aggressive. We had to go and win rights that where we weren't, established. People didn't know our brand. People didn't know what we stood for, our production capabilities and all of that. So the first few years of our life, we were probably quite aggressive. You probably have to pay a premium to get those rights from other rights holders. You're a new entrant, so that stirs up market competition. So I think you probably saw the escalation of fees, and that was definitely a trend for the first 5-10 years of our life. But now we're a much more mature business. We're a much more data rich business, which is great. We now get set-top box data, we get OTT data, we understand our customers, what they value. And therefore, that allows us to be much more strategic with our rights that we want to acquire, and we have to make content choices about what we're going to keep and what we're not going to keep. I think in the initial few years, it was not quite a scorched earth policy, but it was like, let's get volume, we need everything. And now we're in a position where I think we're confident enough in our own business and in understanding our customers to be able to sit back and go, actually, we don't need everything. We can make choices on what's going to drive value, on what our customers want. And that allows us to be more efficient. And I think, you've probably seen a little bit of that in the last few years with certain rights that we've dropped, that people were probably quite surprised we dropped, but we dropped them in full confidence that actually it wasn't going to affect our subspace, that we know what people are staying to watch. And so, I think that's going to be something that we continue to do as we move forward, is just being smart, making smart content choices, and continuing to do that. Our right strategy, when we come down to how we would value it, we would look at 3 things. It's whether it's diving subs, and those big sets of rights like the Premier League and MENA is huge, and that is probably our number 1 subs driver, and so that's going to be critical. We look at churn prevention. How do we keep people for 12 months of the year? And we know we're a huge football audience, but that's where at the moment things like Wimbledon is really important, okay, because it stops people from maybe churning for those summer months. And we also offer with our major competition, the Euros next year will be on as well in the summer months. So they become valuable to us definitely in a kind of churn prevention. And then it's efficiency. Then it's about, those smaller rights that actually to fill the channel that customers want to watch, that we pay a reasonable fee for, but, we're paying on the basis it's for viewership rather than actual additional revenue. So we look at all of those things and I think we're quite confident of how we value rights now. The challenge we will always have, and it's always the unknown, is if there's a new entrant and market competition, because as much as we are, diligent in our valuations, competition and market dynamics will dictate the cost, not what we value it at. And so sometimes we just have to have that confidence of saying, actually, we know what it's worth. If someone else wants to overpay, they can overpay and step away. And maybe we weren't confident enough to do that 10 years ago. I think we are now. And I think you'll see that in our strategy as we move forward.
Okay. So another quick question about piracy. I'm here in the United States where piracy flourishes. It seems to be flourishing everywhere. Just last week, the CEO of the zone in Italy said piracy was costing him something like $300 million annually. So can you tell us a little bit about the anti-piracy strategies you developed around the World Cup? And then is there just a major corporation, is there a wider industry effort to combat this kind of piracy? And does it involve not just industry players, but also government players?
Yeah, I mean, piracy is, when people ask us who our competitors are in the region, piracy is our number 1 competitor because they have a business model we can never match, right? And so it's starting to continue to be a major issue, and not just for us, but for, I think, any entertainment provider, be it sport or general entertainment. I think, we've taken an industry leading position, I think, on it because of everything that happened with BIN at the time, several years ago. And that to some extent forced our hand. And so we've been really very vocal about this. think, there was, in terms of the World Cup, there was some kind of specifics that we did. I mean, we try to tackle piracy in as many ways as we can. It's very, very challenging, and as I said, we'll continue to. But we're putting considerable resource, considerable people, manpower, funding into it, because we know it's what we have to do to protect our business. I mean, the kind of things we looked at the World Cup, we would have sort of 24/7 monitoring of the internet with various companies to detect and report those pilot streams. And we would also use technology to then try and detect and disrupt the sources of that material. There was a big lobbying effort as well, and outreach to ISPs, the internet companies, because ultimately, I mean, there's very few charities. There's one in the UK where BT Sport is also a broadband provider, and not they have an incentive to tackle it. But in a lot of places, the ISPs don't have an incentive to tackle this because they're not, it's not their content and actually they want the usage, So that's a real challenge. And so we're really trying to work with those ISPs, because for a long time there were probably a blockage in the system in that we couldn't get through to, they weren't willing to reveal IP addresses and things like that. So we went with them a lot more in the World Cup, and that was successful. We also worked with various sort of regulatory bodies as well. I think that it has to be a bit of both. You've got to work with those regulatory bodies, but also we took investigations and legal action against people where we could. In answer to your question about kind of a wider industry, we joined something called ACE, which is probably the global antivirus, the leading global anti-piracy industry. We joined that in 2022. That's not just sport, that's entertainment. It's a big, big global operation. And that will continue to be a lobbying effort for the whole industry, because, I think we probably felt for a while we were fighting on our own. And I think everyone's sitting up now and realizing, when we saw those remarks from the DAZN CEO in the week, that's something that our CEO has been saying for several years, so it is a huge threat, and we all need to come together to protect it. And the other thing we need to do, and I think for a long time, rights holders put the onus on us, as, in theory, we only rent those rights. We're not the owners of them. And when they sell us rights, they sell us exclusive rights. And we're getting towards that point where now we're almost having to have those conversations and say with them, they're actually non-exclusive rights. You're not able to protect them. We understand it may not be your fault. It may not, it's force majeure, right? We're all trying to stop this. But ultimately, if you can't give us that, then we're only going to pay for non-exclusive rights. And that's where then you will see that the value drop and the investment drop. And so that's why it's a real serious threat for everyone. And I think some rights holders are better than others. There was a lot of them, I think, had their head in the sand for a long time. We're trying to work as much as we can with them now. And I think most of the big ones now will be investing heavily in it as well. And so, everyone has to take ownership of that to try and tackle this.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask about new legitimate competition for you in the MENA region. It was a year or two ago that BeIN signed an agreement with Saudi Media Company to be its exclusive advertising partner in the region. And of course, the Saudi investment fund has reportedly expressed interest in taking a minority stake in BeIN. So when we're looking at the region, are we looking at competition, cooperation? What's next going to be?
There will always be competition. I think we was operating in lots of markets. So we've seen kind of Amazon moving into France in particular, or other markets as well. At some point, those big companies will look at MENA undoubtedly. I don't think any of them have done it in a serious way yet when it comes to sport, whether that's Amazon or Disney or Paramount or Apple. Not doing much in Arabic, doing much in the sports space, but at some point, I'm sure that will happen. So we will always have competitors, and it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is us valuing the rights on our basis and what we think they're worth, and being confident in that. I mean, in terms of the KSA specific one, I think, it's a huge market, the Saudi market. We know that. I think the fact there was those rumors about PIF taking a potential minority stake, I mean, that's just a reflection of, I think, how our business is at it, which is a really good thing, that, investors are looking at us as a proper business. As we said, we're only 20 years old. And so I think that's a compliment. And I think, it's our job to look at any opportunities there may be to help grow the business and what that might be. But ultimately our ownership would decide, kind of what's best for the future. And I think there is potential to cooperate with other people in that region. You know, aggregation is a huge thing in our industry at the moment. In media, lucky we're a platform business, so we're not a channel business. So we have a platform that can integrate third parties. We do with entertainment. We have studio deals and things like that. So we carry a few other third party channels as well on that platform. So there's always opportunity for us to integrate other channels and other competitors into our ecosystem because we have the set-top box. So, yeah, I think there will continue to be some level of competition, definitely, but also cooperation as we move forward in aggregation.
Okay. Yes, a little bit about, we're looking forward about consolidation in the industry. I mean, BeIN is, of course, a global company, and there are smaller competitors everywhere. And sports properties now often sell their rights to so many different platforms, it can be actually difficult for fans to find their favorite teams to watch. That's a problem here in the U.S. right now with baseball. They've sold off so many rights, you can't find a team. So, well, there's going to be consolidation where, I won't name companies, but they get gobbled up by the Disneys or the BeINs of the world, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the US is a very different market with all funds and everything else. I mean, it is very specific. They sell their rights. I mean, being based in Europe and European media rights for most of my life, I always find it really odd that every single network has got access to NFL and NBA because that's not how we operate in Europe. In Europe, it is, and also the Middle East, you do have that exclusivity over the product. You know, we have every EPL game, we have every Champions League game. They're not selling them elsewhere. So, again, in media, we're very lucky. We have such a broad portfolio that I think subscribers in the region probably only have to have one subscription to get the most out of all of their sports. There's very little we don't have. I mean, you might be a fan of UFC or some of, other things that maybe we don't have on our platform, but we know that audience is a football mad audience, and we have Champions League, La Liga, EPL, we've the AFCON, we've the Asia Cup. We have such a strong offering. And that I think we're in a position of power there, which is great. As I said earlier, I think it's our job to look at opportunities if there is other things. And, we will always continue to look at, what other competitors are doing and platforms they have and what their digital offerings are. And maybe there is opportunities for acquisition in the future of those, but there's no firm plans is all I can say at the moment. But I think we're in a good position.
Well, I think I've used up all the time that was given to us. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been a delight to talk to you. I think BeIN's a fascinating company. You were a fantastic interview. And I think this is where we conclude.
Lovely. Thank you for your time. It's good to speak.
Thank you. Take care.